Hello everyone and welcome to the February meeting of the Merton and Sutton Joint Cemetery Board. My name is supported by my Vice Chair, Councillor Williams, who, if I lose my stream, sure can take over at any point. We've got a few bits of business today, so we'll get started. We're going to start off with any apologies for absence. I don't think we do. But Fazana, is there anyone?
No, Chair, we had no apologies for absence.
Brilliant, fantastic. Okay, so we've got declarations of pecuniary interest. Do you have anyone who wishes to declare anything? If you do, if you just pop it into the chat. No? Brilliant. We can go.
Drew, can I just make a very small point?
Yes, Councillor.
Councillor Nick Draper, I think he must be from Merton because he's not from Sutton. Yeah. It's just the title there, just for our viewers worldwide.
I'm very grateful for pointing that out to me, Steve. Thank you very much. Yeah, definitely, LB Merton. Always better. Thank you.
Well, not necessarily better, different. Okay, so now we've sorted that. We've got two sets of minutes now to approve. So one from the February meeting. Does anyone have any issues with the February minutes? I'm going to take those as approved. Okay, we can assume that that has been done. And the next one, our last meeting, our 23rd of June 2020, we've also got the minutes of that meeting to approve. Is there anyone who's got any comments on anything within there that they want to raise? No? Okay, fantastic. So I think we can take both of those sets of minutes as approved. And if there needs to be any signing of those, I'm sure that can take place once we're out of lockdown. And we'll move now to the main items of business. And the first item is budget monitoring of 2020 and 2021 and the revenue estimates for 21-22. I'm going to open the floor to the officer if there's any officer to present that. Zoe, I think.
It is, yes. Thank you very much. I want to apologise first of all because as part of doing the Appendix A, I did actually expand the analysis, but I did not amend the recommendations 1 and 2 appropriately. I've amended the text, but not the recommendations. So recommendations should read columns 1 to 6, and recommendations 2 should read column 7. So I do apologise for that. It's correct in the body of the report, but not in the recommendations. I wanted to raise that first so everybody could see that rather than it just coming up at the end as part of being asked to approve. So this report sets out the monitoring so far for this year, and it's summarised in Appendix A. Appendix following that, B through to I, provide additional detail to figures and a breakdown for members to see in detail how the figures are made up. You'll notice that spend is much lower this year, and that will be addressed as part of the client side reports and contractor reports later on in the agenda. But pretty much we've forecast forward from that position. I've included a couple of extra columns this year, including commitments to year end with expected spend, and then providing a final outturn figure in column 5 with an overall variance in column 6. And then column 7 then follows on from that and provides an estimate of budget for 21-22. So very much the special projects budget has moved forward to next year, as you can see from the estimates on page 14. So pretty much next year we have 105 worth of budget to undertake those activities. And hopefully, as the impact of COVID subsides, there will be an opportunity to progress those schemes more readily this year. As part of the minutes from the meeting in June, members requested that we repay the loan for the cemetery extension early. Having discussed this with Merton Section 151 officer, who then discussed the situation with Sutton Section 151 officer, they've reached mutual agreement that they would rather that we draw down on the reserves. The reason for doing this is if we repay the loan early, it just counts as a capital receipt, so restricts the application of the money to capital activity, whereas they would rather have the facility to apply this to revenue spending, given the impact of COVID on both Merton and Sutton. As yet, they've not exercised any desire to draw down this financial year, but these estimates set up the provision for them to draw down next financial year. And table 3.2 on page 11 actually details 3 possible options of drawing down between £600,000 and £1 million, and that would be split based on population information. So that's how the precepts were always raised in previous years. So that's how the repayment is calculated. So that table gives a rough approximation of how that money would be split in return to both Merton and Sutton. The key thing is the more that the constituent authorities draw down, the greater the likelihood that Merton may need to borrow in setting out the next portion of the cemetery for burials. So that would be the deciding factor. But, you know, effectively, the level of burials in the cemetery is actually meaning that there is a increase in income throughout the financial year. So we actually expect our reserves to be boosted by another 200k. So, are there any questions?
Any questions? You can either use your hand up or let me know in the chat and I can bring you in. Can I ask a question specifically about the recommendation 3. Table 3.2? Could you go into a little bit more detail about what the consequences might be were the councils to take the full £1 million, and what if any risks that might do? I know you did touch on it briefly, but it cut out slightly on my feed, so I don't know.
Oh, did it? Effectively, both councils decided they wanted to draw down £1 million. That would leave an estimated £200,000 in the board's reserves. And we are about 9 years through repaying the loan. So we think that we would need to extend the cemetery again in about 17 years' time. It cost 1.7 million to extend the cemetery last time. It may or may not cost quite as much as that because we had a contaminated land issue. But if we are not able to build up £1.7 million worth of reserves between now and when we need to lay out the next lot of part of the cemetery, we may need to take out another loan with the constituent authorities. So that's the main danger.
Okay, thank you.
I given the levels of income that we're achieving at the moment, I think that we may well have enough reserves to lay out the next portion.
Okay. And is that even given, so I know that when we go to the risk register, one of that is looking at the consequences of a pandemic. And so we're going through one, and one of the consequences laid out is that the amount of money we'll be getting going forward would be lower than we would otherwise expect. Even taking that into account, you still expect us to level.
How can I put it? You would expect an initial surge of income, and then the income in the future years to go down slightly. Because the surge of income is lower, then you would expect the longer term impact to be lower. Yeah, so yeah, it might be slightly lower, but not really enough to impact on Merton. I think once we get this next tranche of bearer beams sorted, we can actually see the kind of projects we'll need to do over the next few years. What was a worry was the mature pension fund. That's now fully funded, and we're not seeing a long-term impact at the moment. So the next actuarial evaluation will be in about 2 years. So we'll review the situation then. So we keep an eye on a lot of things, but at the moment they're all kind of ticking away, and we're able to earn more income than we're spending, and we can see the position once we've set out these bearer beams going forward, and set the programme around how much money we have available.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Williams, you just come in.
Yes, thank you. Just because it's a first opportunity to welcome Councillor Anne Brittis myself. This is what happens to ex-leaders of the council who end up on the Cemeteries Committee. The question I have is, and I was at the meeting back last year, and it might seem a silly question, but is this our decision as to how much of the reserve we might allow Merton and Sutton to draw down, or is it something they can simply require of us? I'm not quite sure where the decision's being made here.
I think we're giving the flexibility to Merton and Sutton, and with the view that the more they draw down, then you know, I've highlighted the fact that we're looking to build up the reserves to be able to lay out the next portion of the cemetery.
Sorry to interrupt you, Zoe. I'm just meaning we've got the reserve there of over £1 million. They could. Is it our decision to give up some of that and give it back to our constituent authorities, or can they just say, we're looking for a bit of extra cash, please give up 800,000 or £1 million of your reserves?
I would have to defer to legal colleagues who aren't actually at the meeting as to who actually is, but I think in the legal comments it says it's within the powers. So I presume then from that it is the decision of the board. So the legal comments are at point 7. The board,
which page?
it's on page 12. So the board have the authority under the general provisions in the Constitution to carry out the recommendations set in the report.
I mean, given that this recommendation is coming before us because it was something that we requested, I think that would probably suggest that were we to decide not to go down this route, the councils may be able to make that request anyway, but this came about because we set this in motion. And I don't think the councils had any intention before that of coming and saying, we want this money. And I imagine, therefore, we might be able to modify this to say, you know, we will allow the Section 151 officers to choose between option 1 and option 2, but we think £1 million is too much. or we say they can have only option, well, they have option 1 or nothing, or option 2 or nothing. I think I would assume that's down to us, given that we set this whole thing in motion. If that, I mean, I can't really answer your question because I don't necessarily know, but I think that should hopefully provide some answer to what you were asking.
Yeah, and we are expecting our reserves to increase by a further 200k at the end of the year. And I have been prudent in my estimate of the income that we will get from ID Verdi. So I have just assumed that we will get the basic sum. So I expect our income that we actually receive from ID Verdi will be higher than the basic sum.
Thank you.
So how do I say? I don't actually think the £1 million is too steep for the board to bear.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring in a few people. I know Councillor Cook had his hand up right at the beginning. Then I'll bring in Nick and Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Zoe, there's a lot of reference throughout this report to bearer beams, and I just wonder if you could tell me what bearer beams are.
I can tell you, but did you want to jump in and? No, right. The bearer beam, where you have a row of.
I would say, Mark Robertson, could you provide some technical explanation of what a bearer beam is? You'll have to unmute, Mark.
It's a concrete foundation that we stick the headstones sit on, and it runs across the length of the section and keeps the headstones upright. So each section has bearer beams on, as we call them. So they're about 26 inches wide by about 2.5 feet deep.
Okay. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Mark.
Councillor Draper.
Yeah, I was just saying very quick, going back on what Councillor Williams was saying. I'm pretty sure it is down to us. It certainly is for the crematorium board, because we've had the same discussion at that stage. I don't think, because it's across different councils, I don't think the councils have much choice in the matter. It is down to us.
Thanks, Nick. And Councillor Alan Bridges.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I would. Yeah, the tough times for both the board and for councils all round. So I would go for between option 1 and option 2, but veering towards option 1. But I'm quite relaxed about it. But I think we should give them one option rather than between 2.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor. I think when we come back to, if you've got any more questions before we go to actual recommendations, I think there might be a little bit of discussion on that particular recommendation when we get to it. Does anyone else have any questions on this, or should we just move to the recommendations? Mr. Bosley.
Just a point of note of scalability for the expansion of the site. In the client report, we will provide a table of our current capacities on site. And it's just also a footnote for your decision making. In terms of scalability, if we do need to increase the size of the site, we could do that in phases and scale it. So it doesn't necessarily need to be one singular big investment. It could be done in phases.
Thank you. So you're saying that even if we allow the million, they take it, and a few years down the line we need to expand, we don't necessarily have to pay. We don't need a huge amount of money in reserves, because if worst case scenario, we can just use a little bit at a time. I
would say in worst case scenario, if there were secondary or tertiary pandemics that necessitated the need for further space, we still could scale that. But if you look at the capacities that we currently enjoy, there is a long amount of time which it would take to exceed those. So I think that should be considered within your decision making.
Thank you. Should we move then to the recommendations? The first one And if we get to one that there's significant dissent on, we can then maybe modify it. But the first one is modified anyway, just to include column 6 instead of 3. So we okay to note the current budgetary position. Yeah, that looks fine. And then the revenue estimates as well, with a slight amendment that is column. The amendment is to column 7, isn't it? Rather than, yeah. And then the precepts be set as 0. Okay, and I think the big question here is number 4. So we approve the possible repayment of reserves detailed in paragraph 3.2. If we've got general consent that we'll just keep it as it is with the 3 options available, that's fine. But if there's considerable dissent about limiting that to, like Councillor Alan Brotch said, that he'd be minded to just provide 1 or 2 options. Is it otherwise? I mean, I'm happy if anyone comes in, otherwise we could just take it as it is.
You could word it as up to £1 million.
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily think that rewording it is necessary. I mean, up to £1 million is in the options paper, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yes.
I suppose, Chairman, I'm always a bit prudent and slightly unwilling to give up money that we don't have to give up. We did have that discussion about paying down the loan, which again I would have regarded as prudent. The moment we give up our reserves, then we're losing some flexibility, it seems to me. If there was a request from Sutton or Merton that said, you know, we're really in need of some extra cash, and I know times are tight, but I know in Merton we're not down to the last 300,000 yet. I'm kind of with Councillor Alan Brittis on this. I don't see a particular need to be over generous until we've got a clearer idea of what our future commitments are. So I'd be more inclined to restrict it to option 1 or option 2. I don't think giving all of our reserves away except for 24,000, even if we think we could end up with a good chunk going into reserves at the end of the financial year. I'm reluctant to give them all up right now.
I think that's fair enough, and I personally would probably go with you if I was. So should we? I mean, shall we allow option 1 or option 2? So this would go up to 800,000, and then they can possibly. I mean, they can always come back to us later and say we need more, and then we can consider that again later. Yeah. Okay. So are we okay to amend that then, Zoe, just to have up to option 1 or option 2?
Okay.
And then we also have the recommendations 5, 6, and 7 can probably be taken together, unless they've got any questions on the risk management strategy and risk register. I know some people spend a bit of time on that, so I don't know if there's anyone with a question on that. No. Okay, so should we just agree 5, 6, and 7?
Agree.
Yeah, cool. Brilliant. Mr. Buzzy, do you want to just come in on that? So I think you're on mute.
Unfortunately, due to an error, I forgot to admit within this report a request for an additional fee that I would recommend proposing for the use of chapels due to COVID. We have to now clean the chapels between each service. We have set up in the interim a relationship with our in-house cleansing contractor in Merton, who cleanses the chapel between use. There should be a new fee for that function at full cost recovery at £40 per service. And I just need to insert it somewhere I think at 0.5 in terms of fees and charges, that would be a helpful amendment to get the approval of the board. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to unapprove that bit and then vote on it again. Oh, so has anyone got any particular disagreements with that idea? No? Okay, brilliant. So I think we can take all 7 of these to be approved with the modifications to 1, 2, and 4 that we've outlined so far. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, everyone. So we'll now move on to the contractor report, and I'll open the floor for that.
Hi, do you want me to go through the report, or do you want to ask me questions?
Just maybe just briefly summarise what you think are the key bits, and then we can take any questions that come up.
Key bits would be probably replacing the litter bins in the cemeteries with wheelie bins. That's all of them. We need new bearer beams. The roads need repairing, and we need to. The main one is the section change to a Muslim section, so that's KX. As BX is the latest Muslim area, we're running out of room, so we need to move on to KX fairly shortly. But we also need new beams on BX to continue the Muslim burials.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone have read the report have any questions on this? Agatha.
Hi, Mark. Thanks. How are we getting on with the Muslim burials?
I mean, last year when the pandemic started, we got really busy. We were doing 3 a day. This year, at the moment, it's quiet down at the moment. But a couple of weeks ago, we were doing 10 a week. But it has gone quieter. But we don't. It's because we never know with short-term burials. So next week, quiet, but it might end up being really busy.
And the rest of the grounds, the other burials, are they just as busy or not as busy?
Next week, generally it's quiet for the other sections. Yeah, but it's strange. London Road's busy next week, but the Sun isn't busy next week.
Yeah.
But we are doing bookings now into March, and that's due not down to us. That's the funeral directors, because they're so busy that's when.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think we've got 2 Muslim burials on Saturday because we're so busy this week.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Agatha. Any more questions on this report? Councillor Alan Bridges.
It's just a thank you to Mark and all his staff for all their hard work. As a former leader, no doubt David will agree. You know, although I'm not a council or a ward councillor, I do get a lot of calls from our Muslim community, and it's always very congratulatory of our service. We all know about their culture and their need for an early burial, but I think that Mark and all his staff do an excellent job, and there are experts out there who make it easier for us through the mosques. Just a big thank you to Mark and all his staff for looking after our communities.
Thank you, and I think the whole board would echo that, especially given the very difficult times we've had over the last year. And I think that adds extra pain to people who are using this service, and to have that run smoothly, I think is really important to those families. So thank you for all the work that has been done on that. Have we got any?
I have a question. Can I just check when the bearer beams are going to be started again, please?
That will be down to Merton's facilities management. I met them about 2 weeks ago, so they're arranging that.
Did they give it, and did they ever give any indication about, are we talking weeks, months?
They understand that we need the beams on BX as like yesterday, so they're hopefully on the case for
that. Who can give us a definitive answer to
Again, that would be facilities management at Merton.
Councillor
They're not with
McGrath,
us.
we'll be able to give a more comprehensive program for the next year at the next meeting, but it is one of our priorities to both deal with the here and now with the important areas, but also program the work that we were unable to do last year rolling forward. So what I would like to see is a more comprehensive plan approach on how we're going to deliver that across the new financial year.
So I'm sorry, perhaps I'm misunderstanding it. We stopped the we stopped the bearer beam work because of COVID. Is that still the case?
We will be recovering that position in terms of prioritizing the urgent issues as identified in the report, and then building a program for a normalized program for this forthcoming year. But that will take some meetings with facilities to program in that resource. So I wouldn't want to offer a position currently until we've had those discussions with them. And so from my perspective as the client manager, I could best understand that to give you a confirmed answer to that.
Okay, I mean, it sounds like though it is pretty urgent with the bearer beam work. So, and June is the next meeting is June. I wonder if we could have an update within the next couple of weeks on when you'll be able to start the bearer beam work again, given the urgency of it.
So I would tackle that, and we can provide a written update to the committee on the urgent matter. Time is also important. The timing in the year in which you undertake that work. Currently, right now, with the saturated soils at this minute, you wouldn't want to do the bearer beam work, the programmed work at this time. So we'll focus on the urgent matter. If we could undertake that with climate conditions currently, we can provide an update with that. And then I suggest in the June meeting, we provide some further detail on the larger program that would run throughout that year.
Okay, I'm sorry, Chair, if I'm missing it. We were going to do the bearer beam work last year. It was fairly urgent. It has some health and safety issues. We have delayed it for reasons we all understand. I'm not quite clear why the ongoing situation means we have to still delay it, although I can understand that the weather or the state of the ground makes a difference. But I do think it's quite a long time to wait till June for us to have a report on when the bearer beam programme that we've talked about quite a lot in this committee will be back on track. So I would like to ask for this committee at some reasonably short period to have a written report on when the bearer beam work is going to get restarted and what the programme is for then on.
Thank you, Alison. I think that is a fair request. I'll bring in Mr. Bosley again in a second, but Councillor Morell's got her hand up, so I'll bring her in.
Yes, it was just marked the roads and footpaths, and it was just that there used to be a rolling programme for this, and they're in need of major works. When would we be starting looking at those?
That would be down to Merton and the board to agree a budget on that. It's not down to me being the contractor.
Right, okay. Right, thank you.
Okay, is that another question?
We normally have somebody from Merton here, I think.
There is already something in the budget for the footpaths and roadway.
Right, okay. It's just for me, it was there used to be a rolling programme on that, and that was what interested me. This is the same as the bearer beams. So yeah, it's just something I wanted to ask, Chair.
Thank you. And I think if Mr. Bosley and colleagues in Merton might be able to get as the report as Councillor McGrath suggested. I mean, particularly given that Mr. Robertson said that one particular section needs them like yesterday, and then possibly also if we could maybe in conjunction with Zoe and looking at the budget, let us know about the work plan for the paths as well. And I mean, I think the Councillor McGrath's timescale in terms of a couple of weeks, I think is pretty fair. And I don't know if that's going to be something that is minuted and then we can follow up on. maybe outside of the meeting in terms of making sure that the committee, the board get answers pretty quickly on that. Is that okay? Cool, thank you. So unless we've got any more questions on this report, sorry, Mr. Bosley, did you want to come in?
Yeah, yes, Chair. Thank you very much. In regards to the questions of the capital works that need to be undertaken, both in terms of the bearer beams and the roads and footpaths and the like, the budget highlighted in 2.6.2 of the previous paper details what is the program that we'll be working on for the next year, and that's what I would like to report back to you. And I can do an interim report back to you in a short time, detailing our rollout program. A lot of that was delayed because of COVID, and it's something that I need to work with the facilities team and others in order to look at a project plan on how we're going to achieve those over the course of this year, whilst also dealing with the urgent matter as highlighted in the contractor report. So that's the work that we're going to do. And also, I just wanted to clarify in terms of the litter bin activity and the servicing of bins within that activity. As part of our client management functions, we will deal with that matter internally and just ensure that there is a fair provision for litter bins and the servicing of litter bins on site. So I don't think there needs to be a decision on the basis of that. Thank you.
Thank you. So should we move to, unless we've got any other questions, and I can't see any, just move to the recommendation that we review the information and note the content of this report. And then also, obviously, we've got the undertaking to have an interim report on some of the specifics of some of the schemes. So is that agreed? Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Moving on with next item, and I've got as exclusion of the public, but I've been informed before the meeting that the excluded items don't necessarily need to be excluded. So I've been recommended that we just carry on. And if any questions arise that do require exclusion, we then do it at that point, but just for time saving. Although I've spent more time explaining it than it would be reading it out, but there we are. So should we move to the agenda item 7 then? And going back to the client side update for agenda item 9.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Within this report, and my apologies if it's if it's quite long, it's broken down into 3 areas where it was explaining our current COVID business operations and the undertakings that we do during this period. The Memorial Safety Testing Program, which includes aspects of the bearer beam work. And I just wanted to draw your attention to in section 2.4.3, which is table 2, which outlines the capacity at our site for your information. Just highlighting, I just wanted to start with, supporting the words that Councillor Alan Bruce said, and just applauding the good work that everybody has been putting into this program during very trying times during this COVID period. We have worked closely together. We have met on a weekly basis and have bi-weekly updates of the information in order to better manage the outcomes at the site. And it's proved very successful. We have been seeing true partnership working during this period. And that has allowed us to ensure that we haven't had any major issues or significant impacts on our ability to deliver service, even in very trying times. So thank you. In terms of what underpins our work currently, we have a regularly reviewed business continuity plan that is inputted by both Merton Council, Sutton, as well as ID Birdie. And that is really good partnership working, and it allows us to manage our resources effectively. Our last update happened at the beginning of this year, and there we are extending training to all the grounds maintenance officers. So all the grounds maintenance officers working across our parks and green spaces will have some level of training to be able to support the business going further. And that's well received, and it's something I've already put in place to give us better business resiliency. Outlined within that, we have regular meetings, regular updates, and we have received a lot of good attention and to the work that we've done in respect to that. Moving to the memorial safety testing program, that unfortunately is an area which I have identified as a weakness within the service we provide, and it was interrupted somewhat during the COVID period, where we were unable to realize some of the rectifications that we needed to receive within the service. We need to review how we reinstigate this program of important work. It is important work, but when we do it, my recommendation is that we no longer lay headstones down. I'm not in favor of that. And within the report on section 2.2.12, you will see what I would expect to see for the smaller memorials. And these are mostly applicable to even locations where we have bearer beams, where it is called staking banded. So that ensures that the memorial stays upright. It is made secure until further works on bearer beams can be undertaken. I think that's a more suitable way to deal with those issues. And we will have better communication for the customers and the people we serve in respect to pre-notifying them of the works going out, signposting on site, and any subsequent communication if any of the memorials fail within that. We have discussed the reconstruction of the bearer beams, which is a priority of the team. And then just to draw your attention to, once again, to table 2 in regards to the capacities that we have at the location. So thank you, and open to any further questions.
Thank you. And can I first of all start by saying thank you for taking on board the issue of the headstones and not rolling them over. I think we pushed a few meetings ago to make sure that a much more conservative method was used to keep them upright and not, and like staking and banding, for example. And I just want to say thank you for implementing that. And I think a lot of families will be much more happy because of that decision. Does anyone want to come in on any of the Councillor Williams?
Thank you. With regard to the bearer beams, I mean, it does seem that there are some beams in a section of the cemetery that are faulty or have faults have been revealed. Is there any underlying thought as to why that should have happened? I assume that these beams are bought in from somewhere. Is there no kind of stress testing on them, or, you know, it just seems a bit weird that a particular section has got these faulty beams that need to be repaired or replaced?
Well, I mean, some of it would be down to age. So some of the concrete in respect to that, depending on curing processes, could have been, ages ago. It could have had some later structural failure due to curing periods. There's a lot of soil upheaval. So you have movement of the soil, which has twisted the bearer beam. So the bearer beam sat in position, but through regular swelling and then drought periods and the recent changes to kind of radical differences in climate, being very, very wet winters and very dry summers, you have a lot more movement within the soil, which then puts different flexes on the bearer beam. So there's many different there are many different factors in relation to what could impact the longevity of the bare beams that are in situ. That's something that we would investigate in the rectification of that bare beam, and hopefully learn those lessons when we put new bare beams in place as well. But there isn't necessarily a set guarantee period for them, and I don't think that these are new bare beams that are the issue. It's something that we haven't recently procured. It's something that is historic that we are addressing because of some of these factors. I'm not an engineer though, so if I could possibly get engineering advice on it, but it'd probably be best looking forward to ensure that we take those factors into consideration in past failures in the design of future bare beam work to see if we can mitigate any of those factors.
It was really just that they seem to be in a particular section, and I wondered whether you just said it's actually, some of them are older. Well, fair enough. I wondered if it was in a newer section, or there was any peculiarity that should give rise to this. Well, you told us more about bare beams than I probably needed to know, but I hope that we can identify why this particular section seems to have suffered more, and to ensure that it doesn't recur.
I would also say that it's the section that through the memorial safety testing program, when we got to that section, we saw we came across failures. So that's where the service ceased, that the program ceased at that point. So there is the potential that there are further bare beam issues in other areas that we have yet to get to, because we suspended the testing program at that stage, because of, essentially, I didn't think we had a robust position in place in terms of securing memorials in a sensitive way. I was not, when that issue was raised to me internally, I wasn't comfortable with the position of laying them down for an indefinite period. I think that it wasn't appropriate. So we called a suspension of that until we got that position. Unfortunately, at that time, that's when COVID came in and everything else. It was more about, us maintaining the day job, so to speak, rather than looking at some of our program works.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah, Councillor McGrath.
Can I just double check two things? One of which was, I thought in a previous meeting, I may have misremembered this, that we thought that it may be that particular contractors had not installed the memorials, according to the way they should have done. There was some discussion, I seem to remember, about whether or not they were simply cemented on, or whether they had rods going through them into the ground. So it may well be that there were particular contractors that were a problem. And the other one was, am I right in my understanding that we've stopped resting the headstones flat, which I know that there was issues about, and we got some concern from relatives, but doesn't that mean that we have a potential health and safety problem, which is why we were doing it in the first place?
Okay. In terms of the first point about rods, that would have been in relation to the memorial headstones themselves being rodded into the bearer beam, where at a certain point in time, there was more of an assurance that occurred prior to that, and maybe through some masons who are maybe a little less conscientious in their work, they have affixed them onto the bearer beam themselves without rodding them.
Yeah.
And that over time, through freezing, and heat and general movements through the environment have pushed them away from that. That would be a factor down to the memorial installation, which is for the grave owner as compared to the council who, but some of the major issues and why we put a suspension to the testing program was because of faults within the bearer beam themselves, where we would be need to rectify that because it isn't down to the particular installation of any of the memorials. That may be the case that some weren't installed correctly, but I think in general scope, if the bearer beam is at fault, it's our liability. If it is down to individual memorials, which eventually, when we go through the program, we shall probably find a lot more of those moments. That's where we need to communicate with the grave owner in respect to rectifying that. Your secondary point, in terms of the 5-year program, which is the best practice guide for the safety program. So we're within that window. We'll just need to upscale our safety program to get this hiatus period out of the way. But in true fact, this is something that's quite new in terms of it is a program that has gained ground through case law, where we have enacted this to balance risk. It's traditionally is a more of a common sense approach when managing sites, but now it needs to be demonstrated with a bit more rigor through some impacts on case law.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick, do you want to come in?
Briefly, just to support Councillor McGrath on that, that it was there was indeed a report not all that long ago either about it was probably down to 1 or 2 masons, Simon, who just weren't installing the headstones properly at all. I believe we were going to bring it to the attention of the masons themselves. I think it was masons who were dealing in particular with the Muslim community, which resulted in a lot of the graves kind of falling over at that stage. I do hope that has been done because you know it was genuinely upsetting to the community. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. And after this meeting, I can check whether it was done. I remember that conversation as well. Have we got any more? Oh, Agatha, sorry. Don't just unmute.
It's Howard around. I just want to ask him how our field is getting on. You know, the horse paddock or whatever we call it. Are we still getting money for it?
The answer is yes. Can everybody hear me? I'll put the picture on.
Yeah. Okay.
Hello, Howard.
Good afternoon. As far as I understand it, they're fine. I drove down there the other day and it's a bit muddy around and about. And the gentleman telephoned me the other day to say things were going okay and they were looking to expand down there and perhaps carry out some improvement works. So I'm hopeful you'll come up with a presentation probably in time for the board's June meeting.
Are we thinking
but it's still paying the rent, yeah.
Are we thinking of increasing the rent?
I'm always thinking of it. It depends what the lease allows us to do and what I can substantiate.
Yeah.
But they're paying a fairly full rent at the moment, as I recall.
Okay. Oh, and things are going well. That's good. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Agatha. So, unless we've got any more questions, can we note that report? Yep. Brilliant. Now, one thing I did forget to do was approve the minutes of the previous exempt part of the meeting from the last time. So can we, so we've finished all business today, can we approve those as well? You'll find them on page 45 of your pack if you've got it. Brilliant. Okay, they're approved. Okay, so I think, unless anyone can tell me otherwise, I think we've finished our business for today. I just want to thank everyone. Councillor Morrell, sorry.
Drew, could I just ask, is there a vaccination programme for staff to keep them safe? Is there any news of that?
Yeah, Jan, sorry, did you want to?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. yes, there is. We looked at it from both a Merton perspective and a Sutton perspective. I believe, and Mark can confirm, the staff that to date have been vaccinated, but we have been able to get them on a list to be able to receive vaccinations to give us better business resiliency. And that's been very well received. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sorry, Annie, I forgot to bring you in.
It's okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Bosley, and from myself and the London Borough of Sutton, thank you very much to all the staff and officers, and thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Well, I think that does conclude business for today. I want to thank everyone for coming today, and thank everyone who's watching at home, and for all the officers who've put these reports together. And I shall see you all at the next meeting. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.